Okay, it's a little bit loud, they got all the fans running. I'm here at Snail Performance with Travis. He's a tuner here in Northern California. He tunes all their cars. They've got a global time attack car that's been seriously competitive. That's one of the reasons I came to Snail Performance. Anyways, he's inside running the first tune. As you guys can see, the dyno shop they got here, it's legit.
What's up guys, I'm Luke and this is the SubaruONLY show. Today I got the Forester XT on the dyno. I'm here at Snail Performance. It's gonna be an exciting day. Can't wait to see how this goes. So what are we doing here today? These guys are gonna be setting up a ProTune for this Forester so we can run 16 or 18 pounds of boost with all the new engine parts we've installed. That includes the new up pipe, the new VF48 turbo, the new Grimsby divorce downpipe, the new intercooler, the new tumble generator valves without the butterflies, and the entire catback exhaust. Should be exciting to see how the stock horsepower bumps up using a ProTune and all these new aftermarket parts I've installed.
Okay, so what's the game plan? Basically, when you get a ProTune on your car, you're gonna bring it into a Pro Tuning shop like this. They're gonna set up a base map and run the base map on the car first. Then, they're gonna start bumping up the boost and they're gonna start tweaking that air-fuel ratio and the ignition map so that they can create a custom air-fuel map and ignition map based on the components that are in your car and the air flows that are taking place with all those mechanical components in the car. And every car is a little bit different, even if they have the same turbo and a lot of the other same combination of parts. Every car will be a little bit different. So it's really important when you get a ProTune to come to guys that know what they're doing and that give it that customized tune for the combination of parts that are on your car. Let's see how this base map runs, and we're gonna go from there, start dialing the tune. That's what we're doing here today. So step one is the base tune, and he looks like he's revving it up right now, and you can hear it going. Let's check it out. And then the dyno session ended. That's right, it came to an abrupt conclusion. I actually had an exhaust leak, and the guys over in the repair shop didn't have time to fit my Forester into their schedule, so they had to reschedule me for the next day to finish the ProTune. Fast forward to the next day, I drove out there, the car was complete, they took care of the exhaust leak, and the ProTune was done. The guys at Snail Performance did a great job. So let's take a closer look at these dyno numbers so you guys can have a better idea of what kind of dyno numbers you might expect if you install some of these parts on your Subaru. Alright, here is my dyno curve for the 2004 Subaru Forester XT. So let's take a closer look at this Dynograph. This is exactly the kind of dyno sheet that you'll get if you take your car to a tuner and have that car pro-tuned. So what do we have here? We have 4 curves. We have a blue curve, we have a red curve, we have a green curve, and we have a black curve. We also have several axes here. The bottom axis is your engine speed, the left axis here is our engine torque, and the right axis over here is our engine power or engine horsepower. So horsepower on this side, torque on this side, and engine RPM or engine speed on the bottom, okay? And down here, this is where we define those curves, and you can actually see the minimum and maximum values. So we can skip right to the big number and see what the engine max torque is. That's right here, that's 273 foot-pounds of torque. Max horsepower is 234 horsepower. The air-fuel ratio is the next one. That ran between 10.6 and 14.0. And then the boost, that's actually in PSI, and the maximum boost was 17.2 PSI. So let's take a closer look at these curves. And let's start with the blue curve. The blue curve is our torque. As you can see, the torque ramps up and hits a peak of 273 foot-pounds of torque at the wheels at around 3,600 RPM. Now that torque carries nice and flat all the way to above 4,000 RPM before it drops down, and then continues to carry all the way to about 5,000 RPM before it drops down even further. So you have a really nice torque curve between 3,600 RPM and about 5,000 RPM, which is right in the sweet spot for the gear ratios with the automatic transmission and the rear end differential ratio in these Subaru Forester XTs. Now let's move on to the red curve. The red curve is our horsepower numbers. And as you can see over here, I hit my peak horsepower of 234 horsepower right at about 5,700 RPM. But the horsepower carries pretty strongly, all the way to well past 6,000 RPM. Now you might ask, why is the horsepower so low? Well, there's several reasons for the horsepower being so low, but the quick answer is that this is a conservative tune, and I told the tuner that I was going to be rallycrossing this car, I was going to be drag racing this car, and this car has an automatic transmission, and you actually can't put as much boost to an automatic transmission in the high end of the RPM range. And that's a little bit more technical that you should talk about with your tuner. Now the next curve is the boost curve. That's the green curve right here. And as you can see, the boost curve ramps up
and peaks right at 17.2 psi around 3600 RPM. And as you'd expect, that RPM corresponds with the ramping up in the peak torque that your engine makes, because the torque is going to correspond to your boost. Your boost is what makes that torque and pushes that air into your engine. And then the last curve here is just your air-fuel ratio, or your air-fuel sensor. They have a wideband sensor on the car, and they show that the curve for the wideband sensor. And basically the range is between 10.6 and 14.0. And because of the scale right here, you can't really see much value in that AFR sensor curve. But that's why you're taking it to a ProTuner in the first place, is that they're watching this AFR curve, and they're basically showing you they have a really steady and consistent AFR ratio throughout the entire engine operating range. And that's what you're really looking for. Now, jumping back to this boost pressure, one thing I'll mention is that you hit the peak PSI of 17.2 at about 3600 RPM, but as you'll see, and I'll switch hands here, that boost curve actually drops down. And as you get to 6000 RPM, you're well below that 17.2 PSI range. And actually, because of the axes that are shown on this chart, we can't tell exactly where this boost has dropped down to. But the tuner told me that this is very intentional, that you want to pull boost out of a car that has an automatic transmission because of the way that automatic transmission loads the engine and loads that combustion chamber at those higher RPMs. And with that loading, it can lead to ringland failure and pre-ignition, and that's what you're trying to avoid. So there you have it. This is the dyno curve for the 2004 Subaru Forester XT. I'm really happy with these numbers. The car hauls ass on the street, and I can't wait to see how this sucker performs on the dirt and on the drag strip. Okay, that was a pretty thorough breakdown of the dyno sheet that I got from Snail Performance. Now, like I said in the video earlier, 234 horsepower at the wheels sounds like a pretty damn low number. But when you consider that that's a number at the wheels and that the factory rating are horsepower numbers for the flywheel, then you'll start seeing how much power we're really making when we compare all the parts and the ProTune to what the car was completely stock off the showroom floor. And to illustrate that a little bit better, I put together this comparison table on this whiteboard. Okay, so what do we have here? It's 2004 Forester XT. On the left side, I have all the stock numbers, and on the right side, I'm putting my ProTune numbers. But the problem is, with a ProTune, you're measuring your wheel horsepower, and all the ratings for horsepower from the factory are flywheel numbers. So we really need to find a way to compare the flywheel horsepower to the wheel horsepower that your ProTuner measured. And that's what I'm trying to put together on this chart right here. So on the top, we have flywheel horsepower, and we don't really know how much wheel horsepower it was making completely stock. And on this side, we have the ProTune, and we don't really know what the flywheel number is for the ProTune, but we do know what the wheel horsepower is from the ProTune. That's 234 horsepower and 273 foot-pounds of torque. And the way you start figuring out these numbers is your ProTuner is going to run a base map, and that base map is pretty much going to be your stock numbers. And when I took my car to the ProTuner, he said my stock boost levels put out about 160 horsepower at the wheels and about 175 foot-pounds of torque at the wheels. Now the next step is to do a little bit of math. And in this step, we're going to figure out how much horsepower we've lost going from our flywheel to our wheels. And that's pretty simple. You actually just calculate the difference between 160 horsepower and 210 horsepower and figure out what percentage that is. So for my car, it was 50 horsepower, and then we do a little bit of math and we figure out what percent 50 horsepower is of that 210 horsepower total number. And I'll do it right now. 50 horsepower divided by 210 equals 23.8, or 24%. So we basically lose 24% of the power from our engine by the time that power makes its way to the wheels. And that will all depend on what kind of transmission you have. Automatic transmissions lose a lot more power than manual transmissions because of the way they're designed and that they're actually a fluid coupling between the engine and the transmission. And the thing is, that 24% will apply to pretty much any tune I have, in any combination of parts I have, as long as I still have the same driveline, the same transmission, the same rear end differential, all that kind of stuff. As long as the driveline stays the same, that 24% is always going to apply to my car, to this 2004 Forester XT. Now that we have the driveline loss percent, 24%, we can do a little bit of math and figure out which two numbers are going to go up here for the flywheel horsepower and the flywheel torque with the ProTune. Now there's a couple different ways to do the math, but here's the way that I like to think about it. You have 24% of driveline loss. That means 76% is retained. And you can do the math on this side to verify it. 76% times 210 will actually give you 160. So 76% is the actual number that you're multiplying these flywheel values by to get the wheel horsepower values. So you basically carry that 76% over to the ProTune side, and you can either do a little bit of cross multiplication, or you can use the trial and error method and just multiply that 76% times a couple of different target values until you figure out exactly which values will give you 234 and 273.
And there you go, 308 horsepower and 360 foot-pounds of torque at the flywheel. When you multiply that by the 0.76 or the 76% that you retain, you actually get 234 and 273 at the wheels, which is what the Dyno tune measured. So this is going to be a fairly accurate estimation of what the horsepower and torque values are going to be at the flywheel for this engine. And I'll tell you right now, 360 foot-pounds of torque for a 2.5-liter turbocharged motor is serious power. That's a bump up from 235 foot-pounds of torque. So we're talking about an increase of about 125 foot-pounds of torque for this little motor. When you think about how much torque this engine was originally making, 235 foot-pounds, and you can actually do the math here, and we can look at how much of a percent increase that is. Let's do that math real fast. 125 divided by 235 equals 53%. That is legit. Alright guys, I'm going to wrap it up there. I'm Luke, this is the SubaruONLY show. Thank you for checking out the video. I hope it brought you some value. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up. It helps the YouTube algorithm. If you have any comments or questions, please leave it below in the comment section. I'm happy to get back to you guys. And make sure you stay tuned for future videos where I take this Forester to the next Rallycross event for the California Rally Series. And I'm going to be taking this Forester to the local drag strip to see what kind of quarter-mile time this sucker will put down. So make sure you stay tuned. See you next time. Thanks. Later.